Just another brother with another humble question. Just another brother with another humble question.
Welcome to A Brother with Questions. I am your host, B. Period. I appreciate you for joining me this evening. Tonight's going to be a good one, man. I got a guest joining me tonight, knowledgeable guy too. We'll get to him in a second. But before we get started, let me not forget to ask you to like and subscribe to the channel. Please hit that notification button and comment too. Tell me what you think about these videos. But let's go ahead, man. I'm excited. Tonight I have joining me, his name is Jamie Miller. And Mr. Miller, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself to the people for me.
Hey, thanks, B. Period. I am Jamie Miller. I'm I live in Sarasota, Florida. I have got my Gator jersey on, so graduate of the University of Florida. We had a good big week this week, beating Ole Miss. So then I have worked in politics for about 30 years, mostly here in Florida. I've also run campaigns in West Virginia, North Carolina, and Mississippi. And I've worked for the Republican Party of Florida. I'm a former executive director of the Republican Party of Florida. And I am what we like to say is a veteran of the 2000 election for George W. Bush and the recount. I'm a former senior advisor to Newt Gingrich's presidential campaign in Florida. And I've run campaigns from a rural bond issue for an emergency room at a hospital to, working on Newt and George W.'s presidential races. So have had a lot of experience. I work a lot in reputation management for, CEOs and high profile people, and do a good bit of government relations locally here in Sarasota, Florida.
Okay. So here's, listening to that intro, here's where I want to start. What is it like to run a campaign? Like what's the process? Like how do you even get to that job description? You know what? I think I want to run somebody's campaign. Where does that even come from, Jamie?
I will tell you, I started as a volunteer and just working, taking a couple of candidates door to door who I liked, and then I became the chairman of the Republican Party of Sumter County in Florida, which is, some people may know where the villages are, but when I grew up there, it was cow pastures and watermelon fields. Yep. And I grew up, throwing watermelons and penning cows and doing all that stuff that we rural folks do for money when we're kids, right? So, and so that's how I grew up there. And then, lo and behold, somebody hired me to run 10 counties, do the grassroots in 10 counties. So I worked on Jeb Bush's 1998 campaign. I moved here to Sarasota. Then I spent 6 years in Tallahassee. And then I've consulted on campaigns, both small and large. So I think it just came from a passion for doing it. And then I guess people thought I was good enough at it that they would pay me. I think there's, most people, the people who are smart, they get in, they do it for a year or two, and then they go on and become financial advisors or something. I don't know. Realtors.
You like the torture of doing it, so you did it several times though, huh?
Yeah. So it's been, it's an interesting career in the fact that it's just, you never know what's around the corner. I think it's a lot of fun. I also work with, like I said, reputation management with high profile people and CEOs, and help them with their business, public relations, philanthropic goals. And so that's become also a good part of my career and client base, where we work, just kind of what I do for politicians, but just for high profile people and CEO, C-suite types. And, so it's making sure that they're in the right place and doing the right things and meeting the people they want to meet to ensure that their goals are met.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, kind of piggybacking on the campaign management. So with that, one of the things that I've always wondered is, I guess campaigns today, I guess depending on if we're talking local or national, they last about 6 months to a year. And then maybe if it's national, the way we kind of do things in this country, that seems like it could go for 2 years. Or in the case of President Trump, he's been campaigning since 2015.
Yeah.
But what do you do? Let's say once the campaign is over, right? So technically, right, your job is over at that point. So typically, what do you do next?
So there's campaigns all the time, whether they're city, municipal races that happen in the spring, or some legislative bodies like Virginia, Mississippi, Louisiana have off-year races. So you try to find work in those types of races as well.
So you're kind of like a campaign manager for hire at that point. I
gotta say it's like farming, right? When the weather's hot here, we grow watermelons, and then as you move up, you kind of grow them as you go north, a little as the summer moves on, right? So it's just but it is an odd business model, and like a farming model, in the fact that the vast majority of your money is made in 6 months out of every 2 years. And, it doesn't mean you work less, because I always say that it's almost more time consuming getting the work as it is doing the work.
Mm.
It's, writing a speech or working with a candidate is just as time consuming as, meeting with 4 people who might become candidates and signing one of them.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Yeah. We just had a friend who was like you were talking about. She was doing the Florida leg for Vice President Harris,
Mm-hmm.
is what her title was. And so I know, like with her, now that that's over, she was running a nonprofit. So she talked about taking some time off, and then she's going to go back into a nonprofit. But I've always just been curious about just that.
Yeah, I've had times where I took a 3-year stint and worked with our economic development organization here in Sarasota, which I found very interesting. I did government relations for them. So I've had a couple of stints over the years. One off year, I worked for a nonprofit, a cancer support nonprofit. But yeah, out of 30 years, I think those are the 4 that I kind of went in and worked for others versus, doing my own thing. Right.
Interesting. So speaking of that, just piggybacking, what would you say has been your most successful campaign that you manage?
The one that I'm probably most proud of, because it meant so much and it was so razor thin and it gained worldwide attention, would be the 2000 election for George W. and the recount. I was director of grassroots operations for that campaign, which included poll watching, door-to-door phone calls, the mail-in ballot or absentee ballot campaign, and then also back then, 24 years ago, we had mail centers. So if you use soft money to mail, you had to have volunteers touch the mail. So we'd have volunteers stamp the nonprofit indicia on the mail. So my team ran those volunteer centers, and I don't know how much you remember about that race, but that was also a year where there were about 6 states that were separated by about 23,000 votes. And George W. lost 5 of them. The only one he won was Florida, and it was a great deal to the absentee ballot campaign that I orchestrated and developed. And we won absentee ballots in 2000, or George W. won absentee ballots in 2000 by about 187,000 votes. And he won the race by 537 votes out of 6 million cast. So I'm really proud of that 187,000 vote margin. At the time, I told my bosses my goal was 200,000 votes, and my bosses just always told me, it's like, well, thank God it wasn't 186, because it was that close.
Oh wow. Okay. All right. That's cool. That's cool. I'm not. I'm almost 50. So I was much younger during that 2000 election, and in my down. When you're in the mid 20s, it's important, but it ain't important. so I remember how close it was, but I don't remember all the details. But I definitely remember how close it was.
Yeah.
Okay, that's pretty cool. I just always thought that particular job was just a pretty interesting job. But let's dive into where we're at today. So we just obviously saw President-elect Trump win again. What are your thoughts on just the two campaigns, and your thoughts on what was like the difference between the two, and maybe let's start there. What was the difference between
Harris
the two?
had a heck of a job to do in 120 days or whatever it was, 100 days. I don't know that. Quite frankly, I don't know that a Democrat would have won the race, period, just because I think a lot of people voted on the economy. They voted on some on the border. They voted on, kind of the DEI issue going a little too far, especially when it came to girls and boys and girls sports, boys and girls bathrooms, and men and women's prisons. And I think that was, while Harris, I think, tried to make the campaign a lot about abortion, and she did gain margin from 2020. The only demographic she gained margin with was white college educated women. And, and I think that was the abortion issue that she was working for, but it just wasn't enough to offset every single other demographic that Donald Trump, he maybe didn't win African American men, but for instance, in Georgia, he in 2020 he won 10% of African American men, and in 2024 he won 24%. So he more than doubled his margin of victory among African American men. Like I said, he didn't win in every demographic, but every other demographic he increased his margins or maybe in some demographics he decreased his margin of loss, which is just as important. And so Harris also made, I think, some fatal flaws herself in her campaign, and those were, she never really explained to the American people who she was, what she was going to do as president, and why she was qualified. She kind of, if she was asked if she was qualified, it was like, well, because I've been vice president. Well, Americans kind of know that not all vice presidents are qualified to be president. It depends on the responsibilities that president gave you, because some vice presidents never even speak to the president, and so, and the one high profile thing she was given, she failed miserably with, which was the border. And we can parse words on all that if you want, but I think that's the way the public saw it. And so she was, I think those were kind of the major failures. And then she ran this campaign of really that was based upon gender, race, and hatred for Donald Trump. And then in the last 4 days, she kind of pivoted into this, kind of a campaign of unity. And I just I think it rang hollow after, just the week prior, either she or her surrogates called Trump supporters Nazis, stupid, weak, garbage. And then to try to pivot there at the end into a message of unity, I just don't think the American people bought it. And I was on a progressive show last week, and I just asked, I was like, did in your mind, did Harris say she was going to be more liberal or more moderate than Biden? And that host said, he didn't know. He's like, well, I think she would have been more moderate. Like, well, she didn't say it. She never said she was going to be more moderate than Biden. And I think if you left Americans up to their own devices, they assumed because she was from California, they assumed because she was so strong on pro-choice that she was likely to be more liberal than Joe Biden. But she never came out and told people one thing or the other.
Yeah, one of the things that I said when I was looking at the campaign is, one, to answer your question, I think she would have been more liberal. That was my personal opinion, and
I agree.
And I only say that because not so much of what she said during this campaign, but what she said in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you look at her past, it was like, okay, I remember for me, when as vice president, and they had I can't remember what the name of the dinner was or meeting that they had, but she threw me off when she used her pronouns and then had everybody at the table use their pronouns, and I was like, that was a red flag during her vice presidency. But then going back to her previous campaign promises that she had in 2019 when she was running. So when you combine all of that, even though she didn't say any of that on this current presidential run, because she didn't establish herself beyond, agreeing with everything that she thought Joe Biden did, it was like, okay, so what are you not saying this time? Because I know what you said in the past. And for me, I just had a lot of trust issues that she was going to do something different.
I think that analysis is dead on. I mean, I think that's a good barometer of what the American people would answer if you asked them now. There were a good number of people who voted for her anyway because they just didn't like Donald Trump, and so that was the only thing that kept this close. It was the only thing that kept if you kind of wonder if it wasn't Donald Trump at the top of the ticket, would Republicans have won 57 U.S. Senate seats and 250 seats in the House instead of having these, close margins? But you never know, because it's kind of like changing that pitcher who's throwing a no-hitter with, in the seventh inning, but he's running out of gas.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh, if we didn't take him out, he probably would have thrown that no-hitter. Well, you just never know.
You just never know. Yeah.
So you play the cards that you're dealt. And, the one thing that Republicans did that Democrats did not, you have to realize Democrats have not had a primary for president, a fair primary for president, since 2008. And, of course, Obama, his reelection, like history would show, an incumbent president doesn't have, much of a race. So I'm not criticizing that race. But certainly in 2016, Democrats cooked the books against Bernie Sanders for Hillary Clinton. In 2020, they cleared the decks for Biden. And in 2024, they made this switcheroo at the end for Harris. So, I think people have this, underlying feeling of distrust for Democrats when they're voting for the top of the ticket, because there has not been a level of fairness in a decade and a half in picking the Democratic presidential nominee.
Okay, let's pivot. Let's talk about Trump a little bit. So I agree with you that the Harris campaign focused a lot on, he's a bad guy. So since he's a bad guy, you need to vote for us. I just wanted to dive in. So, one of the big criticisms, of course, right? So we know he got convicted of the 34 counts. What's your thoughts and opinion on the fact that they made him a felon? And then, we were sort of forced to vote for a felon.
I think what we saw, I think what happened with one thing that voters said with this election is, we are the jury. We have seen the facts. We don't believe you. And we find Donald Trump not guilty. And we feel like these were political persecutions. and I know that if people thought these things were real, they never would have voted for them. But they thought just the opposite. They thought that Democrats used our government and our tax dollars to persecute and prosecute a political opponent. And I think that's one thing that the American people said with their votes, is that, with the facts as we have them, we don't want political prosecutions. Now, the cautionary tale for Donald Trump, I think, as he attains the presidency in January, is that I don't think American people voted for him to use our tax dollars and the federal government to politically prosecute people either.
Right.
And so, so there's pendulum swings, and sometimes people take, there's no question that I think American people said you're not guilty, but I don't know. Certainly there's some Republicans who want to use government to get retribution for what happened over the last 8 years to Donald Trump and others. But we certainly, I question whether that's what the American people said with their vote.
Yeah, I hope. My hope is, because I went on record already. I voted for Trump. I'm one of those crazy black guys that they were talking about. But
I would
but
say
yeah, I hope he doesn't do that.
In elections, it's all who you're standing next to, right? Like, and Harris did not make the sale, and so, and I also say that, Donald Trump, people who voted for Donald Trump voted for him because he leads us through fire. And those folks were willing to look past the fires he sets. We know he sets fires. Some people might call it him being a jerk. Some people may call it, oh, he's just, political rhetoric. But the truth of the matter is, in his 4 years of presidency, he led us through fire. Even with COVID, with the, getting a vaccine from March that was then available in December, to cut out the bureaucratic red tape to allow that to happen in 7 or 8 short months, from a pandemic hitting our shores to having a vaccine that was available at least for senior citizens in December. Now, some people, depending on where you lived and your health and all those other things, weren't eligible for a vaccine until the first quarter of 2021. But certainly that vaccine's not available if Donald Trump doesn't cut the red tape and allow pharmaceutical companies to find the vaccine without going through all the crap they have to go through during a regular drug trial.
Now there's some that criticize that, though, and say we shouldn't have done that. What do you think about those?
Well, I think each person should be of their own. And when you have something, the issue, if you look back to March 2020, and I at that time I was posting just on Facebook, and I, like a lot of people, just stuck in my house, nothing to do. We're watching Tiger King, for God's sake, and it shows like Schitt's Creek, like, it's like, okay, what are we doing? We're just binge watching TV and having pizzas delivered. And but one of the things I did during that time is I started graphing all of this data, and I graphed it nationally, graphed it from Florida. And people forget that at the beginning of this pandemic, we had our first case January 21st on our shores. I think there were 3 cases diagnosed on January 21st. And well, that's not true. The first cases were diagnosed in China in January 21st, because that's my son's birthday. And, the headline on Apple News that day was Nancy Pelosi leads impeachment, right? The third story down on Apple News is there's this weird sickness over in China that's killed some people, right? And so by the time it gets to our shores in February, by March 7th or 10th or 12th, depending on where you live, the whole world shuts down, or our whole world has shut down. But in Italy, the acceleration of the death rate, the doubling of the death rate, was every 3 days. And I don't know if your dad ever told you or offered you. My dad told me, he's like, I can give you $100 for your birthday, or I can give you a penny and I can double it every day. For my dad would say 10 or 20 days because he couldn't afford to do a whole month, right? And so, but if you double it every day for 30 days, it comes up to a couple $1 million, right? And so you can take a penny and double it. So there was a real concern at the time about this doubling of the death rate. And we know that over in Italy, which was an elderly population, a lot like Florida's, that the doubling of the death rate was a real concern. And, and when we first started the pandemic, we were doubling our death rate every 3 days. And you can see how quickly that would go through the population, 3, 6, 12, 24, in 30 days, you're talking about tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. And so, or even millions of people. And so you're, every governor, the president, everybody was trying to grapple with how to handle that the best. But for sure, we know that if there's a virus running around or a bug and we can have a vaccine, we should give people the opportunity to take it. Now, like many things, I think they knew that a third of the people probably wouldn't take it and take their chances with other things. And now we're dealing with things like, people in the military who on religious grounds or based on their own health or whatever decided not to take the shot and they got thrown out of the military.
Right.
Or government workers who were fired, or take any number of people who were fired because they chose, and it's funny that we had a presidential candidate in 2024 run an entire campaign, her body, her choice, my body, my choice. And yet when it came to a vaccine, it wasn't your body, your choice. It was the government's choice, and you were going to take it if you were going to work for the government or be in the military, or if you were going to be out in public, and then they basically ran a propaganda campaign for anybody who didn't do it, or anybody who didn't want to wear a mask was going to get vilified, spit on, yelled at, and our own citizens were policing other people over stupid things like masks and things that I as a citizen should not be policing you. I'm not a policeman, and so I just, it's not my place to police anybody. Like, I'm not a policeman.
Yeah, right.
So I guess if I see something wrong, I'll call police, but it's not my place to confront you and yell at you from one citizen to another because I don't like what you're wearing. We don't do that to teenage girls because they're not wearing enough clothes or whatever, or anybody, if I did that to a teenager, I'd probably get arrested. Right. And probably should get arrested because it's none of my business of what somebody else's kid is wearing, but we went through that period. And so I know I gave a long explanation. I hope I answered your question in there somewhere, but I think the answer to your question is, the government, I think, had a responsibility to provide a vaccine as quickly as possible to those who wanted one.
I can see that point. I can see that, and then once they provide it, it's up to you whether or not you choose to take it. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so with the just to kind of piggyback, I know for me, for a lot of people, I know some people who, for instance, in the campaign, they agreed that Vice President Harris did not present herself in a good light, but their objection to Donald Trump led them to vote for her anyway. Just for me personally, I just didn't think it was good enough. I needed a more valid reason to offer her a vote if I was going to give her one. And so I know I had to make the choice. And for me, while I argue that he's certainly not my favorite person in the world, but as president, I don't really need that. So, and I looked at the policies that he put forward. Then for me, I was just like, okay, I'd rather rock with these
We've had,
policies.
I wrote on Substack, you don't have to like the man to know that at that time he was the best person for the job.
Right.
And we've had probably quite a few presidents who their friends and foes alike would describe them as narcissists or jerks, or what, use a negative term, right? And so all the terms that people use about Donald Trump, and at the end of the day, the people, much like I kind of liken it to Hillary Clinton. I thought Hillary Clinton was a jerk. I've called her worse. But the people who voted for Hillary, she was their jerk. She was a jerk for them. And that's the way that the people who voted for Donald Trump feel. They feel like, man, that guy's a jerk, but man, is he being a jerk for me? And that we need that kind of jerk to get things right. And so I think that's, for those who, voted for Harris and really don't understand how somebody like me or you could vote for Trump, you could, that's one of the reasons why. Is just, everybody who voted for Trump didn't like him. They didn't think he was the nicest guy in the world. They didn't like his. Now I've had a conversation with Donald Trump for about 30 minutes in 2015, one conversation in my life. But I've met many people who have met him, and much like my conversation, he seemed to be a friendly, funny, intelligent, capable human being, right? And there were times in my conversation with him where he was asking me about elections and election law, and the Christian coalition vote versus the Hispanic vote, and mail-in ballots versus early, like just talking like a candidate. And it was a very intelligent conversation, and but it was, he came across as very human. And I know that I had a podcast the night of election night. My wife and I did a 4-hour live podcast, and one of the guests is a friend of mine, Morgan Ortagus, who was the spokesperson for the Secretary of State under Trump and Mike Pompeo. And she came on the podcast, and my wife loves telling this story about that Morgan tells that, she had a dog, and she put on Facebook that her dog had died. And, she was sad. She had the dog 13 or 14 years. And, most of her adult life, she's had this dog, and how sad she was. And she gets a call from the President of the United States. And it's like, hi, Mr. President, what do you do? You're like, what can I do for you, Mr. President? Like, what? Mm-hmm. Why are you calling? Well, Morgan, I was just calling to see how you're doing. Well, Mr. President, thank you. I'm doing quite well. Like, what can I do to help you? No, like, didn't your dog die? Like, I'm calling to see how you're dealing with your dog dying. And she's like, he spent 20 minutes on the phone with me just consoling me about my dog. And she's like, he's the president of the United States. And why would he take time out of his day to check on me, an employee in a department, not even in the West Wing, and a pretty important employee, but still not not in the West Wing, and not like chief of staff, not, she's 5th or 6th down the totem pole type of thing. Pretty high up, but not, and she's just like, I just found it incredibly compassionate. And the other story I like to tell is a guy who's been in the news recently. He's running for Congress. He's a state senator here. He's a man of very strong Jewish faith, and his 8-year-old son meets the president. And the President Trump leans down and shakes his hand and goes, young man, your dad's my favorite Jew. and Randy Fine stands up, he's like, oh, that's awfully nice of you, Mr. President. I was like, but you have Jewish people in your family. He goes, yeah, but I know your son will be telling his grandchildren that the President of the United States said that about his dad. And it's that type of thing that just makes you feel like, wow, like he knows how to capture. I wrote a book. It's called American Speeches That Changed History. And there's 20 speeches, mostly presidents, 15 or 16 more presidents, everything from Patrick Henry to Barack Obama. And the one thing about each one of those speeches, regardless of whether the person's president or not, is they captured a moment in time. And Donald Trump knows how to capture that moment in time where he knows who he's speaking to. He knows the importance of the moment. And in that moment, for Randy Fine, it was a family moment. And yet he didn't just brush it off and walk away. He captured that moment in time and made it a special moment for not only Senator Fine, but, Senator Fine's son. So I tend to think that people who judge Donald Trump on his political rhetoric alone are probably a little too harsh.
Yeah, and you hear many, you hear a few stories like that. I've heard Mike Tyson tell some of those stories. Dana White, he's told similar stories. So you get a lot of people who, I don't know if you want to say they're in the inner circle, but they've certainly had closer relationships than most. And they share those stories where in moments, especially in moments of need, he stepped up when other people didn't and didn't ask for credit or financial gain as a result of it. It was just
or press.
Right. Just willing to help because he saw somebody who needed help and he could provide the help that they needed in that moment. So yeah, you definitely hear a lot of those. Let's keep it going though. Let's talk about some of these nominations. So I'm gonna be honest. The one nomination that has gotten me so far, and at this point it's been withdrawn, but it's the Matt Gaetz nomination. And so I saw some of your Substack about this. You didn't necessarily think it was a bad idea, but I'm trying to understand why you thought it was a good idea. And I'll give you my purpose. So when I first heard the nomination,
a fair question.
When I first heard the nomination, my first thought was, wait a minute, he's a lawyer. So when I went back, I saw his looked at, when he graduated, at what point did he go to Congress? And it seems like, he was a lawyer, but I don't, did he try any cases? Or did he just get a job at one point? And then, because quite soon after.
I don't even know. I've known Matt Gaetz a long time. I don't even know that he's ever worked as a lawyer. I mean,
really? See that? And that's what I was wondering.
But that's certainly not what he's known for, right? And so
definitely. But what makes you think he was qualified?
I've been critical. So if you go back far enough in my Substack, I've been critical of Matt Gaetz during the McCarthy scenario, and I'm not someone to, kind of like you and I were talking before the show, I'm not one to necessarily criticize a football coach, openly, because I'm like, you have more information than I have, and hopefully you're making the right decision based on that information, because you're making all this money. It's not like you're trying to make the wrong decision. But I was critical of Matt Gaetz about the McCarthy issue, not because I thought McCarthy was the wrong person to be speaker, because he was from California. I thought we should have gone with a speaker from a Republican state, quite frankly. And I was like, oh, we're going from Pelosi to another Californian. And I didn't know that much about Mike McCarthy. Speaker McCarthy. I get him and the football coach confused, and so I might have done it just there. But he's I don't try to. If you want to take somebody into a smoke-filled room and treat him like Julius Caesar, that's between you and him, and whoever wins comes out. But you have to have a plan to leave the room. And I felt like Matt Gaetz did not have a plan to be successful in his coup. And so then when he was successful in his coup, we went through 3 weeks of, the nation, the train still ran, right? The subway still took people to work and all those things, but it was turmoil that was not needed in our country at that time. And so I was critical of that. Now, I was also trustworthy of Donald Trump. If that's the person he wants, I'll support him. he's the head football coach. He has more information than I have. And if he wants Matt Gaetz, I'll support him. The one thing that I did have said, and I was on an interview with BBC. It was my first international television appearance, so I was excited about it. And they gave me a pretty tough interview about Matt Gaetz and Marco Rubio. And what I said there was Matt Gaetz is not under investigation by any law enforcement. He's not under investigation. He's not under indictment. And, so there's some salacious material out there about him, but it's good for the gossip pages. And, and they were like, well, you support trafficking a 17-year-old girl across state lines, and I'm like, no, of course not. I just don't know that I trust the U.S. House to investigate anyone at this point. We know that they are the U.S. House is a political organization. We know that there were more people. There were only 5 Republicans who joined Matt Gaetz in the coup of McCarthy. The rest were all Democrats. And so we know that there's tons of Republicans who did not support Matt Gaetz in overthrowing McCarthy. And, so some of those Republicans sat on a committee and want to release a political report. It's not an indictment. It's not a criminal investigation. It's a political one. And so, so I was going to give the president, mostly the president, not Matt, but mostly the president, the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, I hear you on that. But for me, it was more investigation aside, because like you said, it's an investigation. It sounds terrible, but at the end of the day, for all it sounded, there was no criminal charges and no one is pushing him, out of his seat or anything like that. So as far as I'm concerned, they're not taking it too seriously, but it does sound good when you're talking about it on television. I was more
where it sounds bad.
well, for
sounds good
news,
for ratings. Good for ratings.
Yeah, they like the salacious.
Yeah.
But I was more concerned just the idea that, like you said, we're not even sure if he actually practiced law. And so that was my thing. How does a guy who, while he has the degree, who's never truly practiced law, become the quote unquote top lawyer in the country?
Oddly enough, the BBC did not ask me that question, and I'm glad they didn't, right? Because I think I agree with you that was I think the real criticism of the pick, right? And so now they've gone with Pam Bondi, who is a long-term prosecutor. She served 2 terms, 8 years. We have term limits in Florida, so 8 years is the maximum you can serve as Attorney General. She served 2 terms as Attorney General of Florida, and she's very capable. I would suggest that the Democrats who are trying to get rid of Matt Gaetz probably are second guessing whether they should have done that now that they are looking Pam Bondi in the face of running, because I saw one political pundit, progressive political pundit, who's like, yeah, now we're in for it because she's capable.
Right.
She is
she
capable.
knows what she's doing.
She knows what she's doing, and she's going to do it right. And she's, I've known Pam since she first ran, and she's good on her feet. She is good in front of a camera, and she's probably more often than not the smartest person in the room. And she's humble enough to never think that of herself and want other people's opinions. But the couple of times I've been in a room with her, she certainly was one of the smartest, if not the smartest.
Okay. All right. I'm in, we're at that honeymoon stage of it all. So I'm just looking forward to January 20th and seeing what comes to fruition. Let's close this as we're coming to a close here. Let's talk some Florida politics here. So tell me what you think of DeSantis' second term here. What are your thoughts?
I think Ron DeSantis well, there's through my 30 years, I have found that there are people who are very good campaigners, and then there are people who are very good legislators and administrators, and people are seldom both. And you have the very good politicians, the Bill Clintons of the world, are good at both. The George W. Bushes are good at both, or the Ronald Reagans, if you will. Um, Ron DeSantis is a good governor. He is a good administrator. He's not a very good politician. His political instincts need, help, and so he tends to go by his political gut, and his gut is right when it comes to things like COVID or DEI or the school choice, or go down the list of things that he's done for the state of Florida that are going to have long-term positive benefits for all citizens. And and yet, I would go back to his presidential run, and I would say there's two ways you run for president if Donald Trump is running, especially after you just had a historic 19-point win like Ron DeSantis had in 2022. You get in January of 2023, and you go fight Donald Trump for the nomination, and you go negative, and you do everything you can to try to go toe-to-toe and become the nominee. Or you wait until October of 2023, see if Trump stumbles, and then get in the race. And he did neither. He, waited till like June. He soft pedaled his way in, and then he kind of had a soft launch, and then he had a relaunch, and it was just one debacle after another. And I don't know if he didn't trust his campaign team, or I'm not sure what the inside story is there, because I have not heard it. So, but there was something that just never got on track. His message never got on track. We know that he's not a great retail politician as far as going into diners in Iowa and New Hampshire and meeting people, and people walking away saying, wow, the stories that people say about Donald Trump after meeting him one time. Wow, I really, felt like he was listening to me. And people didn't have those stories. People weren't telling those stories about Ron DeSantis. So, I think when people criticize DeSantis, they kind of see that, and it's a little bit of a red herring, because it's because he's been a really good governor.
Okay. See, for me, the second term for me has been disappointing. So I was a huge fan of the first term, which is why I gladly voted for him in the second term. But in the second term, he's been, in my opinion, he's focused too much on what I like to call like fringe politics, and so we've got a lot of the big bills have been bills related to stopping, whether it's DEI or whether it's stopping like the trans issue and things of those nature. And to me, while those things were or are important, to me they shouldn't have been, I don't know, the focus. I guess I was looking for him to do more in terms of business, and I don't feel like, at least from what I can kind of find, if you will, that he's done more in that business realm. And for me, that's what I was looking for. And so from that perspective, I kind of been a little bit disappointed in this second term.
Yeah,
and then,
I mean, outside of the hurricanes, I could see where, the insurance reform bill that went through has had some help, but the relief has been slow in coming for Florida homeowners. I think people will continue to see that relief. They'll continue to see more competitive insurance companies in the market. But, now everybody's reeling again, because we've had these, 3 really big storms, Debbie, Helene, and Milton come through, a lot like 2004. that Jeb Bush had to deal with, and or '05, whatever year that was, and so when Charlie kind of started the coming through, so I can see where somebody thinks he kind of took his eye off the ball a little bit because of his presidential race and trying to lean into that identity politics. I agree with him on most of it. I think that, going from 14 weeks to 6 weeks in abortion was probably something that most Floridians are a little uncomfortable with. And so that's why I think you saw 58% support the abortion constitutional amendment. Not enough for it to win, but enough, certainly a majority of voters supported being more lenient about abortions and not more restrictive. Not that that's going to do anything in the legislature. I thought 14 weeks was kind of a reasonable place to land for a conservative state. But I'm not a legislator, so.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I agree. I could have lived with that too. Because I didn't, again, it's one of those things where when you already have a limit that's not, it's not 8 months. So when you already got a pretty good limit, I don't know if you have to double down to sort of prove.
Well, I try to be consistent, and hopefully you took that away from my Substack, which is called Reasonable Arguments. But I try to be consistent in political policies that I support. For instance, if I were to die, hopefully my wife hears that and comes in and tries to resuscitate me, right? Tries to get my heart going again. But if I were to, get in a car wreck and hit my head and my brain dead, I'm dead, right? Like they're like, you're dead. You're not coming back from that. And so I prefer to kind of look at life in the same way that life begins when brain activity occurs. And so that's not quite as definitive as a heartbeat, which is about that 6 week period. Brain life begins somewhere in, depending on what studies you read, 12 to 15 weeks. And so that's why I thought 14 was kind of a week that would be reasonable. And most people don't know this, but and I try to paint it with a broad brush because it's hard to nail down exactly, but most hospitals in most states will not give a death certificate to a fetus less than 20 weeks. And, they will not give a death certificate until even if you want to have the child, they won't give you a death certificate unless the fetus is older than 20 weeks. And I don't know I don't know where that came from. I don't know what science it's built upon, but it seems to be a pretty well-regarded practice in hospitals. And, if that is kind of the line in the sand that's been in the sand for decades, then if you're a more conservative state and you're on, on few weeks on the less side of 20 weeks, okay. If you're maybe a couple weeks on the more side, if you're a liberal state, okay. But, to me, it's something that is a big distraction. I mean, we came very close to having a President Harris based upon this one issue. And it's not really even an issue that is, that I don't want to say that important, because the people who believe it is important think it's very important, but it's not as important as, let's say, war,
right?
Or famine, or some of these other things that we could have faced. And I'm not saying that we're going to have biblical famine if Harris had won, but that same thing. There's things that I felt like people should look at that were more concerning with Harris than just that one issue, but there's certainly those folks who voted just on that one issue alone.
There are definitely some of those voted on that issue alone. Here's how I want to close this out. So DeSantis is coming out. He's getting out of here in Florida. Who should we be looking out for? Have you have any idea of who is on the horizon in Florida?
Yeah, I think there's a good cast of characters who are going to be, certainly at this moment in time. Right now it's rumored that Jimmy Petronas will run for the open congressional seat where Matt Gaetz is vacating. But he was rumored to run for governor. Ashley Moody, the attorney general, rumored to run for governor. Wilton Simpson, the agriculture commissioner, all three statewide elected officials rumored to run for governor. So you start with those. You have Byron Donalds, congressman from Naples. Matt Gaetz, who was obviously a congressman from North Florida, was mentioned. Congressman Waltz, who was District 6 over around St. Augustine, east of Jacksonville, was taken into the Trump administration, so you would assume that he's not running, but he was mentioned. There's a congresswoman in Tampa, Laurel Lee, who's mentioned a good bit. So there's no shortage of people who are kicking the tires on one or all of those statewide elected positions.
Gotcha. And that's the Republican. You know any Democrats?
On the Democrat side, I think I think people are waiting to see what John Morgan might do. John Morgan, I think, is the one Democrat who could bring some reasonableness to their party here in Florida. He's been someone who, for the people, right? Like, what's a better slogan than that for somebody running for governor? Number one. And I'm certainly not endorsing him, but if he's willing to pull a Rick Scott, he certainly has way more name ID than Rick Scott did when Rick Scott first ran. And if John Morgan's willing to put $100 million into the race, I'm not sure that there's a Republican who's out there who's willing to match it. Now, can a Republican raise enough money to match that $100 million? Probably, but even with the extra million voter registration that Republicans have now, it's not unlike when 1990, when Jim Smith, Republican, won Secretary of State statewide, or Jeb Bush in 1994 came within 60,000 votes of beating Lawton Childs. And so you're talking about very similar, not numbers, but percentage lead by Democrat registration back in 1990 and 1994. So, can a Democrat win statewide in 2026? For sure, if they have the right candidate who's financed with the right message. And, if Republicans have competitive primaries and Democrats do not, then, that's the recipe for Democrats to be victorious in 2026.
Okay. All right. Well, we will certainly see. It's right around the horizon.
What names are you hearing?
Jamie, I don't hear any names, Jamie.
No, I don't know.
I'm trying to raise my profile, Jamie.
You and me both. Let's do it together. Let's do it together.
Maybe one day they'll call a brother with questions and find out what his real thoughts are. But yeah, I'm just certainly looking to see where the next governor tries to take Florida. I don't know if I told you, but I'm in Florida too. So, but I certainly want to see where the next governor takes Florida and where it goes.
What part of Florida are you from? You're from Orlando. You're from Orlando, right?
I grew up in Orlando.
Yeah.
Grew up in Orlando. So, yeah, because we get a lot of flack down here. And I honestly look at people all the time and I go, what is the problem? Like, why wouldn't you want to be in this state?
Some of it, I'll be honest. I had started, you get so busy doing real work, and I do the Substack and I have some subscribers, but like you, I'm trying to raise my profile. It's certainly not something I make a living at. And, but one of the ones that I've been working on over the years, and it's probably a moot point now, was just how Joe Biden and his administration would constantly criticize Florida and Floridians on a regular basis, whether it was out of the Commerce Department talking about tourism and the danger for tourists in Florida, or, oh, Florida is not safe to visit in the summertime because of hurricanes, or, they would constantly have this drumbeat of how Florida was horrible. And and then that permeates pop culture. So now you start seeing it in TV and movies and, songs, right? And so all of that starts then, it starts telling a narrative, whether it's correct or not. There's this narrative out in the public that, Florida is this weird place. I tell my friends all the time, I was like, people who have never been to Florida think you can stand on the steps of Cinderella Castle, see the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico, but you have to tap dance across crocodiles to get to either one. You have to tap dance across crocodiles and fight pythons, right? And so, so it's just, so there's this perception out there that, Florida is just kind of this, hashtag Florida man, right? And so some of us wear that badge pretty proudly, and it's just, and look at people who don't understand it, just think, well, you're never going to understand it, because we love it.
We love it, man. I'm not going nowhere, man. My wife's been trying to get me to move for years, and I'm like, nope.
Where to?
She, honestly, I think she doesn't care as long as we move. But the two places she's mentioned are Georgia and Texas.
Oh, okay.
Georgia and Texas.
My son who lives out in Houston, and he loves it. He absolutely loves Houston, and but I don't know. It's but it's to each their own, I guess.
To each their own.
I live here in Sarasota. I always told my kids, and so if you have any people out there raising kids who are in your audience, I always told my kids, if you go where you want to have your extracurricular activities, or you want to go on vacation, just go move there. Just go move there, and you'll find a significant other. You'll find a job. Everything, there's jobs everywhere. So go to where you want to live, and then you'll find a significant other who loves to live there, and there'll be a job there, and life will be fine. So I have one who moved to Denver because he loves skiing and camping in the summer, and I have one who is in Houston because he just has a dream of owning a lot of property, and it's cheap there, and he knows he can get into, a huge 200 or 300 acre ranch that he would never be able to buy in Florida. And so, and I was like, well, to each their own. Go live the life that you dream of having.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Man, Jamie, I appreciate your time here tonight. Before we get out of here, two things.
You're right. We could have gone for 3 hours, no problem.
Please tell the people how to contact you.
So you can find me. I have it on the screen at Rep Jam on almost every social media, except for Substack and YouTube. Substack and YouTube is at Reasonable Arguments. And you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, all at Rep Jam. And then I'm also the author, if you're looking for a great book to take to your holiday parties instead of taking a bottle of wine. It's American Speeches That Changed History. And you can find that on Amazon.
Okay. All right, Jamie, I appreciate you. American Speeches That Changed History, right?
Yep.
That changed history. Okay. All right, man. Well, Jamie, I appreciate you for joining me tonight. This has been a great conversation. I'm B. Period, and I'm out.